Welcome, Estelden here. So I was looking around on Steam yesterday and I noticed Beyond a Steel Sky. Couldn't really believe it. I mean, Beyond a Steel Sky, the sequel to Beneath the Steel Sky, as you can see, it's a classic adventure game. I've got the big box up in the cupboard somewhere. It's one of my favorite games. It's got really cool music, it's got really great characters, awesome puzzles. It's in like that real old school adventure era with like the likes of Monkey Island and the other LucasArts games. You've got Grim Fandango, Sam and Max, Day of the Tentacle. And for me, the other big one are the games from Revolution Software. So this is their website and they're pretty well known for the Broken Sword series. That's another really classic lineup of games. And I mean, the Shadows of the Templars, it's a fucking classic. It's one of the best ever in terms of narrative and that style. And to see Beyond a Steel Sky after all these years is it's probably not something I expected, but it made me kind of jump into what's going on with just adventure games and point and click in general. It's been a really, really tricky time for them. They're kind of caught in the middle to some degree of all these other genres. Games have we got VR now, all of this different stuff going on. So a simple game where there's maybe a character who's going on a pretty simple adventure. He's not gunning down terrorists in whatever's going on in the latest Call of Duty game or the Battlefield game. I don't know these days. I mean, that stuff's pretty crazy. They're certainly not looking at history from what we've seen of things like Battlefield 5. But it'll normally be a pretty simple kind of story. For example, Broken Sword. As I mentioned, the other Revolution series, I mean, you play as George Stobart. He's a lawyer he's on holiday, in fact, and he finds himself in the middle of a murder mystery. That's not something in 2020 that's going to move copies. I mean, Ubisoft, EA, they're not going to put on a box somewhere. You play as George Stobart, you're a lawyer, and you're gonna maybe solve a few puzzles and figure out what's going on. No. You can't put that on a box. I mean, they need to have their big features of the game. Everything's got to be innovative to some degree. There's got to be all this fancy stuff going on. You've got to mention Battle Royale somewhere. That's just how it is now. So what I want to do is take a look at what's going on with this game and where it kind of sits in the scheme of things. Because I'd heard about this game years ago. I mean, I've just noticed it now looking on Steam, but I knew this game was kind of in the mix to some degree because the Broken Sword 5 that you see here, so Broken Sword 5, The Serpent's Curse, this was a Kickstarter, so really important to adventure games is Kickstarter, when it comes to video games, pretty much started because of point and clicks. We had Broken Age, and God, it's not a great piece of work, to be honest, but Broken Age, which was originally Double Fine Adventure, was like the first big Kickstarter game, period. And it paved the way for a lot of others. There's a lot of absolute debacles in there. Is it Hero U it's called, and it's like Quest for Glory, which is a Sierra series, really, really good series. The creators, the Cole, they're like a husband and wife team. They started work on Hero U because they created all the Quest for Glory games. And Hero U was an absolute disaster. I think it came out about a year or two ago. It's probably longer than that now, but you know, time fucking flies. But anyway, disaster. I think the Coles who made that game, they had to like reimburse their house or something. Like there was a massive financial disaster, even though that they funded their Kickstarter goal. So they well and truly hit the goal for what they wanted to make the game, but safe to say it was not enough. And a lot of developers fell into that too, where they'd go on Kickstarter, they'd fund a game because all the nostalgic fans like myself would go on and back these projects, but they didn't really kind of know what went into not just developing the game, but how they're going to produce it, how they're going to manage a budget, and how they're then going to get it out to fans and distribute it. So that really was like the final nail in the coffin for adventure games, and just occasionally something will come along. And as I mentioned, Broken Sword 5, it was a Kickstarter developed game. I thought it was okay. It was like one of those sort of reunion movies or something, or even like a reunion album for a band where it comes out. It's okay. It's a bit like the original ones, but it's not as good. Not really close, I would say. Art was fantastic. I'll give them that. It stayed true to the original style, which was really just quality 2D graphics, but not the best. However, there was a stretch goal with this game when it was on Kickstarter, which was that if they reach it, they'd make Beyond a Steel Sky. And they didn't reach the goal, but apparently they found a way to make it happen anyway. And the sad thing was, their way to make it happen apparently was Apple Arcade. And I was doing a bit of research on this Apple Arcade, and it's some sort of video game service. They've got over 100 games or something, and they've funded a whole heap, but it looks like a mess. It's Apple, like you just hear the word Apple Arcade, and anyone who's kind of like serious about, like, anyone who's into a point-and-click adventure is probably fairly kind of hardcore with some sort of type of gaming, in that they're not on a mobile phone just playing the odd game. Like, if you are into a point and click adventure, you've probably dabbled in a fair few genres, and the last thing you want to be doing is fucking Apple Arcade. So I think that anyone who is remotely interested in this Beyond a Steel Sky, it's not something that they're going to get into. Like, you're not going to download Apple Arcade and look into the service and do all of that just to play this old point-and-click nostalgic kind of reboot or sequel or whatever you want to call it. So it released on Steam, and this is we're getting on about a year after release. I think it came out in June 2019 originally, and I didn't even know this. So there was no momentum when it comes to this game, and I went on YouTube, and I think like the launch trailer got maybe 10,000 views or something like that. So absolutely no momentum because it was on Apple Arcade, and finally it comes to Steam, and people like myself, they finally hear about it. But the game's been out for a year, so it's like, I mean, alright, I'm playing it now, and I've played through a little bit of it. It's decent. It's 3D, whereas the original was 2D and had some pretty cool graphics for the time, 1994 or something, I think it was, the year I was born. And the 3D, like, it's okay, but it's something that's really just... It's been like a thorn in adventure game side for a long time. And that is because it doesn't translate well. Like, point and click, that's the name of the genre, but 3D graphics, it doesn't really translate to point and click. So you're normally playing with a keyboard, and there's it's a real cumbersome amount of controls and stuff. I mean, I'm looking at my keyboard now, and they'll have you using like every possible key to do stuff. Like, you'll have to press L to look at something, P to pick something up, U to use it, and like, you've got to memorize all these different controls to have a smooth experience, and it just doesn't work. Whereas point and click, it's in the name. You just point on something and you click on it, and it works. I don't know what they're thinking. So they have the 3D graphics, and look, they look good because the original, and it's in my box wherever it is, the original Beneath the Steel Sky actually came with a little comic book, which was really, really cool. I mean, nowadays you buy a physical copy of a game on PS4 or something, and you won't even get an instruction booklet. I mean, you'll be lucky to actually get a disc copy of the game. Half the collection, collector's editions I buy of a PC game, I'll usually get a downloadable code, so they're not even generous enough to give me the actual physical game, so let alone an instruction booklet or something. So this old title, Beneath the Steel Sky, had a comic book tie-in. It explained the whole intro to the story. Really, really cool. And Beyond a Steel Sky kind of follows that up by having the cutscenes, at least what I've seen so far, told in comic book form. So I really liked that. I think it was a nice addition for a game that's probably not built on a huge budget. They're not going to have the huge CGI, EA cutscenes and things like that. So stylistic choice, which is what I really like, rather than like half-baking an attempt to do things like the big publishers. So you get into it, and the puzzles are okay, the voice acting and the dialogue and the writing, it's all decent enough for something like this, where you're not expecting the world, you're just hoping for like a pretty decent game in the same vein. Where it kind of falls apart, though, is the 3D, dynamic with the controls is fairly ridiculous. I had to distract a bird to get something from its mouth, and it's like a key item in your quest. And every time I tried to go over it to use an item on it, the bird would just sort of walk away and fly away, and it's not built into the puzzle, if that makes sense. It's more so that it's programmed to move around, and any time I try and use it, it's already moving away. So a little bit of a mess in that aspect, and that would be completely a non-issue if it was 2D graphics. I remember a puzzle in the original Monkey Island where you have to do the same thing. You've got to distract a seagull and get something that it's trying to eat, something like that. And because it's 2D, very easy to program in this day and age, I'm sure, to do something quite similar. So the 3D just gets in the way. I'm not sure what they're trying to do with it. But if I had to guess, and this is what leads me to the problems adventure games and point and clicks have, it's that they're trying to get a new audience. So the problem with point and click is, in the new age, ever since they kind of died in the 90s, and that was because console gaming kind of became a big thing, people were playing on controllers, and point and click it didn't really have anywhere to go. There were a few console ports. The fourth Monkey Island, Escape from Monkey Island, had a PS2 release, and not much momentum. I don't think the controls were anything special. They were terrible on PC, I can say. So on a controller, maybe slightly better, but still probably quite sluggish and not suitable for the genre. So I think this whole 3D thing that they're still persisting with, apparently, I mean, I thought they'd moved on from this because, as I said, Broken Sword 5, it was incredible 2D graphics, but maybe not, apparently. I mean, they've clearly been working with this Apple Arcade to bring the game out. Maybe they wanted it to be 3D. They're pushing their service. They might want to be seen as, hey, we're like a real games platform or whatever it is. We're not just 2D, like we can do the 3D stuff as well. The specs for iPhones and everything are fantastic. Do it in 3D so we can show it all off. Maybe that was the reason, but either way, it's just not suitable. And I think most people who look at this game, I mean, I remember when I originally saw it announced, like 2 years ago or whatever, I saw it and I just thought, why are they going back to this 3D? And everyone else kind of thought the same thing. Like, it doesn't work. It's rubbish. So that's where it kind of got to. So adventure gaming now, trying to fund these adventure games, it's really tough. Ron Gilbert, he's responsible for Monkey Island. He created Thimbleweed Park a few years ago, and I followed that development really, really closely because he made a perfect Kickstarter. He announced it, he gave you a little bit of a demo video of actual gameplay, not just concepts and stuff like that you kind of see, where it's all up in the air. So he showed you exactly what you're going to get. He showed you a whole timeline of what he was doing. It was really well organised, and it's one of the only Kickstarters I've seen where it's actually come out on time. So most Kickstarters, they'll be pushed back, you don't know what's happening, and Hero U that I mentioned before, the Quest for Glory successor, that was like 6 years or something ridiculous like that, and I think most people were like, oh, okay, we just want, like, if we get anything at this point, it's probably, that's a positive, we're not really expecting it. But Thimbleweed Park, that was right on time. I think maybe there might have been a small delay or something, but very, very small. It was out, I played it. Whatever you think of the game, whether you think the story was good, it was average or whatever, you can't argue that it's a complete game and it's exactly what we were promised. And I thought it was fantastic. It is one of the only adventure games I've played in recent times that actually fits in with the classic LucasArts formula, which I think is really special, which is you have an Act 1, get into the story, learn a bit about what's going on. You have the big open world act where you're like exploring all these islands and these big sections of the game, and it's fantastic. There's a lot you can do. You might get stuck on one puzzle, but there's always something else you can be doing as well, and everything just kind of feeds into each other, and I love it. And it finally will have a climax of maybe another couple of acts where it's a little bit more streamlined, still some puzzles, and then you finally get done, and it's a big finale and everything, maybe in Act 4. So Thimbleweed Park had the same thing. You had the big act, the big sort of midway act where You're doing all sorts of things. You were playing as different characters. It was really, really cool. Now, the sad thing is Ron Gilbert said, despite doing that, despite doing all the right things, really organised campaign, had the money, had the backing, put the game out, it didn't really sell. So it kind of turned out that the core audience had backed the project, and that might make common sense. Like, who's buying the game if they're not backing it? But you really, really hope that there's a lot of people who are more sort of normie in the style of this, where they might like the sound of the game, they might have played a point-and-click adventure or two. I mean, Monkey Island got re-released all those years ago for consoles and stuff. You hope there's quite a few of those people around who then turn around and buy the game as well, so the devs can make a bit of a profit, so it's been worth it for them. They know if they make another project in the same vein that things are pretty safe, but that was not to be. So the game came out, and no, that was it. Like, they just broke even, and it was a stressful time. So there's not much chance that someone like Ron Gilbert, who worked miracles really in the context of other adventure games and other small kickstarted sort of self-funded games like that he did all of that and he just broke even. So it was like a positive that he didn't have some sort of disaster story and had to reimburse his house like the Coles. That's what he got out of it. So when you see that happen, that's a really bad place for the adventure game genre to be. To have that be the pinnacle, he's just broke even. It's rough. It's really rough if you're a fan of those games. So, coming back to Beyond a Steel Sky, that's where I was kind of puzzled, because this game's come out. They've obviously got funding from somewhere, and as it turned out, it was this Apple Arcade nonsense. So, it's a worry to me, because, I mean, it's a slap in the face to the fans of the original and people who like Broken Sword 5, because people kickstarted that game and saw the backer goal that was in there, the bonus goal, and you'd be excited to think, oh, geez, maybe they're going to do this one as well. They're doing Broken Sword 5, they're going to do this. It's just like a new era for adventure games. But it's now looking like the only way you get something like this made is if you've got Apple following the Netflix model for gaming, and they're just walking around and funding sort of anything that's a bit of a niche that's going to bring people from different walks of life in terms of gaming into the fold. That's what it kind of looks like. And now, and I looked at this as well, it's a damn shame, because the reviews are very positive. From what I played, the very brief kind of little adventure I had in the game so far, pretty good. It's just a real shame that we can't get something like this unless there's some nonsense involved, which is obviously the funding from Apple. So how can we get to a stage where we have these games out and they kind of bring in a new audience? I think something they need to stop doing is watering this down to the point where no one's happy. They do that quite a lot with a lot of adventure games. I mean, we just have to look at Telltale, who have since gone under. Instead of having puzzles, they turn them into walking simulators, because they probably do their market research and think, right, if people get stuck in a game, they get sick of it, and they move on. So we better take out all the puzzles. No. Because, like, the best thing that's ever happened to me in an adventure game is getting stuck on a puzzle. Because what happens is it makes you, like, explore and really take in the whole world. Like, there's been some, like, unbelievably hard puzzles in some of the old Monkey Island games, at least for when I was a young kid and I was trying to figure all this stuff out. That's when you go around, you talk to everyone, and you're not just going through the motions. Like, there's a lot of games where you might enter a new area and there's all these people to talk to, and you go, right, I'll just go and talk. I'll talk to him, exhaust all the dialogue, whatever. But when you're playing an adventure game and you're stuck, you're excited to go around and talk to all of these people, because you think, right, someone's got a solution here. If I go around and I'm gonna exhaust all of my options here in terms of the puzzle, it's a really, really different feeling. And I think hard puzzles in this day and age, they might be missing a trick, because you look at Dark Souls, I reckon in 2006, 2007, if you pitched a game like Dark Souls, the Microsofts and the Sonys, oh no, like, it's hard, like, well, we want to be accessible so everyone can play it and everyone can buy it. But that came out, and that's, like, started a whole new trend. And I think adventure games could do something as well. Like, if you had a game like that where, I mean, it's tricky, of course, with walkthroughs and stuff, but if you found a way to get this out and make it, like, a real challenge that you can go on the internet and brag, and that's like the main thing. I mean, Dark Souls, you can go on there, I've done New Game plus 10 or whatever people are doing. If you can do that with an adventure game, that would be really cool, and I think a lot of people would love that, to kind of embark on that challenge for an adventure game that's got really, really hard puzzles. Logical puzzles, I'll say. I'm not talking about things like the monkey wrench in Monkey Island 2, or some of those Sierra adventures. I'm not talking about them. Like, I just mean logical, really good puzzles, but they're a lot more tricky. What happens in a lot of modern adventure games is the puzzle will always be, there's like 2 or 3 items in the area, and it's a really small area, and you're like, alright, so I picked up this item, there's literally one possible use for this, I'll go over there and do it. There's not a lot of thinking. And even in Beyond a Steel Sky, like, there's a hints menu as well. Like, it sort of becomes it's not a walking simulator, but the amount of thinking is pretty negligible. And that's a shame. I'd love to go back to the hard puzzles, and I think that's where they're missing a trick. They haven't really tried that. I would say Thimbleweed Park came the closest. I got stuck a few times. That was really, really close, but I think if it was able to be marketed as a much more tricky game, they might have a bit more success. I think it's just going to take that one really, really good game to kind of take off, to give this genre a second chance, because it was so popular back in the 90s and even the 80s and everything, that I think it deserves another lease of life. So I'm going to crack on with Beyond a Steel Sky. I hope it's a classic, and I hope to be able to potentially report on some other good games in the future. Thanks for listening, guys. Like, subscribe. I'm going to be looking at some more games in a similar vein, smaller games, like really, really good ones, and also tackle some issues in some whatever nonsense is going on with the big publishers pretty soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again.